All right, so now we're moving on to our next unit. And in our next unit, we're now going to be dealing with rational numbers, which means it's not all whole numbers anymore. We're going to be dealing with fractions and decimals. Anything that can be rewritten as a fraction is a rational number. So we are going to be dealing with rational numbers. So our first thing that we're doing today is converting fractions and decimals. So by the end of this video, what I hope you have an understanding of, and remember, if you don't master it by the end of this video, that's not what is expected. We'll practice in class, and through practice, you'll be able to master it. But you'll be able to know how to convert a fraction to a decimal, and then decimals to fractions. All right, so that's what you need to be able to have at least a basic understanding of at the end of this video, so that this way, when we start practicing in class, we can start strengthening those skills and building upon those skills. All right, there's only 3 examples we're going to go through. All right, remember, when we're converting from a fraction to a decimal, because that's what we will be asked to do here, we will be asked to convert to a decimal. And when we're asked to convert from a fraction to a decimal, we can remember that that fraction bar means division. So I can go ahead and say, okay, well, we are just going to do 49 divided by 8. Right? So when we're dividing, remember, the first thing is we look at the first number and say, well, can 8 go into 4? No, it can't. So then we need to look at the first 2 numbers together and say, well, can 8 go into 49? Yes, it can. It goes into it 6 whole times, because 6 times 8 gives me 48. So I know that I can fit 6 whole 8s into that 49. After we figure out how many numbers can go into it, we then subtract, and now I'm left with 1. What you may have done in the past is you may have said, okay, well, it's 8 went into 49 6 whole times, so I can write this as 6 remainder 1, which you will never, ever, ever, ever write that again. Or you might have said, well, it went into a 6 whole times with 1 remaining, and we were dividing by 8, so it can be rewritten as 6 and 1/8. All right, so that are ways that you might have done it before, but now we need to keep going. So when we run out of numbers, when I give you 49, you may not see it or you may not write it, but there are infinitely many zeros behind that 49. So when we want to convert it to a decimal, we then, once we run out of numbers that we have that we can actually divide into, we need to then add the decimal, if the decimal's not already there. And since I'm adding it here, it's going to be added to my answer. And then I can start adding zeros, all right? Because there are infinitely many zeros behind that 49. By adding that 0, I now have a number that I can bring down. And now it's no longer can 8 go into 1, but can 8 go into 10. And yes, 8 goes into 10 one time. So I multiply 1 times 8, that gives me 8. I subtract. I still have a remainder. So that means I'm going to add another 0, and I will bring this down. So now when I add the 0, 8 goes into 20. Well, how many times? It goes into it twice, because 8 times 2 gives me 16. So now I have 4. Once again, I had a remainder, so I'm going to add another 0 and bring this down. Right? And we will keep adding zeros until the number either repeats or until the number ends. So now when I do this, okay, well, does 8 go into 40? Yes, it does. It goes into it 5 times. So 8 times 5 gives me 40. Now when I subtract, I have a remainder of 0. I know that 49 over 8 is equivalent to 6.125. All right, so that will be converting it to a decimal. All right, now what we're going to do is we're going to convert this 6.125 back into a fraction, so you can see how we can go in both ways. All right, when you're converting decimals to a fraction, what is super important is that you know what the place value is of our last decimal. So it's important that you know this, that once we go past the decimal place, our first values are tenths, then hundreds, then thousands, then 10,000s, 100,000s, and millions, and so on. All right, so it's very similar to our regular number system that we have, or place values that we have before the decimals, but we just don't have these ones. And what this means is when we see, okay, well, we have 3 decimals, so the third decimal place is our thousands. What this means is that we can rewrite this as 6 and 125 over 1,000. When we have our place value in our decimals, it's telling us what we're dividing by. So if it's tenths, we're dividing by 10. If it's hundreds, we're dividing by hundreds. All right, so what we're doing here then is simply taking our whole number, and then we're going to rewrite this as a mixed fraction or a mixed number, and then from here, whatever our whole number is get written out front. We find our place value of our decimal, and that gets put over what our place value is. So in this case, it's the thousands. So what we do next then is we just need to simply simplify 125 over 1,000. Right, I'm going to go through this in a little bit slower steps. If you know that 125 goes into 1,000 right away, then go ahead and simplify that by that. What I'm going to do though is I'm going to first simplify by 25 because I know that 25 goes into 125 and I know that 25 goes into 1,000. So 25 goes into 125 5 times and 25 goes into 1,000 40 times. And then I say, okay, well, 5 and 40, they're both divisible by 5, so I'm going to go ahead and reduce this by 5. And 5 divided by 5 is 1, 40 divided by 5 is 8. So this 125 reduces to 1/8. So that means this as a fraction is 6 1/8, which we know it was because we just converted that fraction. All right, so the main thing that you need to be able to remember when you're converting to a fraction is these place values and what their names are. All right, let's go ahead and work on another problem. All right, so for this problem, we're then converting our fraction to a decimal. All right, so what we need to do first, as I said, when you look at your fractions, simplify as much as you can. So I know that these are both divisible by 2, so I'm just going to go ahead and divide them. So 200 divided by 2 is 100. 16 divided by 2 is 8. Now look and say, oh, wait, I can divide even more because they're still both even. So that means they're still both divisible by 2. So I'm going to go ahead. 100 divided by 2 is 50. And 8 divided by 2 is 4. Well, wait a minute. We can still divide. So I'm going to go ahead and divide each of these by 2. And now I'm getting 25/2. All right, if you can, you want to reduce your fraction as much as you possibly can because it will make your life a lot easier. Now we're going to go ahead. Remember, this is equivalent to 25 divided by 2. So now when I'm dividing by 2, I see, okay, well, what can I divide? So 2 goes into 2. It does one time. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 2, subtract. That gives me 0. I'll bring down a 5. So does 2 go into 5? Yes, it does, twice. So now I'm going to go ahead and multiply 2 by 2 and get 4. Subtract, and I get 1. Right, now from here, I'm like, okay, well, I ran out of numbers. But remember, I can add an infinite amount of zeros. So I'm going to add the decimal place there and say, okay, now I'm going to bring this down. And I'm going to ask, does 2 go into 10? And yes, it does. It goes into it 5 times. All right, so now when I do 2 times 5, that gives me 10. And now I have a remainder of 0. So I know that this 25/2 is equivalent to 12.5. All right, all we're going to do is convert this decimal back into a fraction, and then that'll be it for this video. All right, so if I'm converting this to a fraction, remember, because I have this whole number, right away I know it's going to be written as 12 and some number over another number, because I know that this is my whole number. So when I'm writing my mixed fraction, I can go ahead and write that 12 right away. All right, then what I need to do is identify, well, where's my place value? Well, it's the first decimal, so that means that we're at my tenths. So I can rewrite this 5/10. All right, and once we write this, then we have to reduce as much as we can. Well, they're both divisible by 5, so I know it's going to give me an answer of 1/2. So this can be rewritten as 12 1/2. Now, if you want to write it as an improper fraction, then what you could do is we can multiply and we add. So 2 times 12 is 24, plus 1 is 25, so it could be 25/2. You don't have to write it as an improper fraction when we're converting. You can leave it as a mixed fraction, and that will still give you full credit. All right, you just must be able to convert from a decimal to a fraction. All right, and then in class, we're going to go over, well, what happens when we have repeating decimals. But before we got into that, I wanted to just give you guys a little bit easier questions to work on, and that will be it.